A couple of questions around the exercise for you, Megan. Somebody said if, one of the issues that people are having right now is during COVID is they're not exercising as much. We know that exercise is very neuroprotective. Is it possible, somebody asked, if you stop exercising, due to what's going on right now, can you get back what you lost in terms of brain protection and health? Or have you just kind of lost that, or can you kind of get back into it and be okay?
No, I don't think that's a really good question. And I think that's a really reasonable concern. But I definitely think that, this isn't coming from, I'm not citing research here, but you definitely can get back, what you've lost. I think that if you just, do even a little bit at home, even just walking around, if you've been sitting for 30 minutes, just getting up and walking around your kitchen table, just trying to move a little bit, doing some seated stretches, anything you can do. But for sure, when we're able to get back to, our gyms or our PT clinics or whatever it is, that's something that can definitely start. You can regain what you feel like you've lost. And it might take a little patience, and you try not to be frustrated or too hard on yourself, because all of this is out of our control right now. But don't worry that you've lost anything you've gained.
Great, thank you. Patina, a couple of people asked about fasting for people with Parkinson's. If you did talk a lot about, kind of spreading out your nutrients throughout the day. What about the idea of fasting? Sorry, I'm gonna unmute you real quick. Okay, go ahead.
That's not something that we normally recommend to fast, and for a lot of reasons, really. We want to make sure that people are getting nutrition in throughout the day, energy throughout the day. So it's not something that I know of that has ever been really recommended for Parkinson's.
Great. So Mark, actually, this is a question that came up around exercise, but I think it's a little bit more related to what you're talking about. We didn't get much to apathy, but I know you have a fair bit to say about it. And so a couple of the people are asking, what do I do as a care partner when my person with Parkinson's is unmotivated, doesn't want to get up, won't do anything? They know that exercise is really beneficial, but they're just not doing it. What can a care partner do? What really is apathy? How is it different than, let's say, depression? And then what are ways to combat it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a really tricky issue to deal with. So apathy is a lack of motivation, or it's an amotivational state in which you really don't have interest or enjoy the things that you previously found enjoyable, and have no motivation to more or less do anything. And that may be from a physical standpoint, to get up, to move, to engage, to interact, but it also might be from an emotional standpoint as well. You just don't have the psychological or emotional energy and the physical energy to really want to do things. And this is a huge, huge problem. It's probably the most vexing problem for caregivers and spouses, because it feels like, from their perspective often, that the person with Parkinson's is doing this on purpose. And I think it's really important to know that apathy is biologically based in most cases, although people can be resistant and difficult at times from a personality standpoint. But most of the time in Parkinson's disease, apathy is a biologically based feature of the disease. And it's something that the person typically is not doing on purpose. So I think with that recognition, you can start thinking about, in a very caring way, as a care partner and spouse or caregiver, how that particular symptom might be addressed. One of the ways that people have found success is involving structure. That is to say, if the person with Parkinson's disease knows that at 9 o'clock on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they are going on a circuit around the block, and they're going to walk, that structure sets them up for anticipation of that physical activity in this case. It may be that they've got somebody who's coming over to the house and they've got to engage with them. If they know ahead of time that these things are happening, they can ramp up that energy that it takes. And it always takes energy to interact, to do physical things. That structure helps a lot. And care partners have found that to be very successful. But it's really a very challenging problem when people with Parkinson's, and you really need to find individualized approaches to how to deal with this. Forcing someone, who doesn't want to and pulling them out of the chair, that sort of thing, can cause problems. And so you really need to be creative, and it's a hard one. Engage your doctor as well, if you can.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is that if we understand that apathy is, this isn't going to be solved by logic, like to be able to go to somebody, well, wait a minute, this research says that exercise is great. That's like not the level that it's working on. And so really try and think of a more action-oriented thing. Like you said, the structure is great. Trying to convince somebody who's apathetic is not really going to do anything.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
So real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I just think one thing I've seen in my physical therapy practice, along with what Mark was saying, is that oftentimes it can help starting with appointments for physical therapy or occupational therapy, because if you have that one-on-one set, say every Tuesday, Thursday at 10 a.m., you have to go to this like a regular doctor's appointment, that sets that structure, and then the PT can educate the family and the patient about apathy and about those things. And then if they're in that routine, once they are discharged from that one-on-one care, I encourage my patients to try to keep that same time and day as their time they're going to exercise moving forward, whether they're joining a wellness class or exercising on their own at home, because now we've built it into their routine. And I think people are more successful that way. So that's one thing I've seen has been helpful.
Yeah. Another sort of tangent to this is some people are talking about motivation for people who either themselves, where they feel like they're in more pain when they exercise, or they have arthritis, or they have another condition. And some people say, I'm too tired after I exercise, or I'm too tired to exercise. And what are some recommendations that you give to them? I mean, I think it's counterintuitive, right? Exercise actually makes us feel better and can actually improve arthritis and things like that. But, what are some strategies that you help people that are dealing with that?
Yeah, I think that finding a physical therapist, occupational therapist that really specializes in Parkinson's, that can understand some of those concerns, and that can really structure a program for you individually. So even though like what I presented is all very valid information, it's still, you have to take each person on an individual basis. Everybody has different orthopedic issues or cognitive issues. So it's about finding someone that can really help design an exercise prescription for you individually, and to take those things into consideration. So I think that that's a really helpful tool, so that you're not frustrated and feeling like, okay, I did this one exercise program and I felt horrible, so now I'm not doing any exercise at all. So that would be my recommendation, is to really seek out professional advice from someone who specializes in the treatment of Parkinson's. Great,
thank you. Patina, somebody asked about current recommendations regarding dietary restrictions when taking MAOB inhibitors. What sort of, what would you say to that? And if you don't have
that, I don't actually know
okay.
About that, but I can find out about that.
Okay.
If there's a way for me to get back to them.
Yeah, no problem. So a couple of people have asked about very specific things around, okay, is there a better benefit of drinking soy milk over cow milk? And like, what specifically does magnesium do for people with Parkinson's?
Yeah. So with the soy milk and the cow's milk, both are a good source of protein. So really it's kind of like which one do you like better? Or if you don't tolerate, if you have some lactose intolerance, soy milk can be a good, still high protein option for that. Soy is a complete protein, just like the protein that you have in cow's milk. So really it's very similar. There's calcium and vitamin D added to it. So it's pretty similar. It's kind of a matter of preference, or, are you having problems tolerating the lactose or not? So, yeah. Okay.
And then magnesium, what is that? What is that?
Yeah, so the magnesium actually just helps with bone strengthening, actually. So it's one of the things that we do to help with osteoporosis, along with the calcium and the vitamin D.
Okay, Great.
Yeah.
Another, some people actually in the Parkinson's community have told me they take magnesium to help with sleep. That will depend on the type of magnesium that you take. And the other thing is, some people have really bad leg cramps. And so some people
Yes,
have found,
right.
relief from that. It is a very, very individual situation for sure. But, something like that, they could try that out. Let's see, I have a lot of cognition. So Mark, a lot of people are talking about the drugs that may increase the chances of impulse control disorders and hallucinations. So what can you say about them as side effects of drugs? And then how do you know, is it a side effect of a drug versus it's Parkinson's progressing?
Yeah, that's a good question, because these symptoms can be very scary. Certainly the visual hallucinations and also impulse control problems where somebody's personality or behavior is changing in a way that can be detrimental to financial situations or relationships. Again, the impulse control disorders are changes in behavior where you're not thinking through, you're allowing these impulses that we all have to come to the forefront when they should be sort of tamped down by the frontal lobes of the brain. And the depletion of the dopamine and other neurochemicals can result in that. One of the drugs that can, class of drugs that can precipitate these visual hallucinations and impulse control problems are dopamine agonists. And they're often used in conjunction with your Sinemet or your dopamine or levodopa carbidopa. So these drugs in combination can almost produce an overabundance of dopamine at the wrong areas of the brain. And it's more complicated than that, but basically they can release these hallucinations, which are the idea that there's something there. The person is very much realizing that these things are visually there and are often not disturbed by them. Some patients that I've had have actually rather enjoyed hallucinations. They see children running around the house and it's not troubling to them. They're curious about them and they may be a little sort of, why is this happening? That's interesting. That shouldn't be there. But the problem is when these hallucinations start to cause people to react to them and they want to get up and run away from the children that are in the house, or there's an animal that's coming after them, or that's when they become a problem. And they're often very disturbing to the care partner as well. So these medicines can release these phenomena in a susceptible brain. And the Parkinson's brain, because of its fundamental problem with dopamine and other neurotransmitters, is susceptible. And when you start changing the neurochemical milieu by adding these drugs, sometimes in prone individuals, you can release these phenomena. So the impulse control disorders and the visual hallucinations are two examples of that. Again, the main point of those is if you have those symptoms, or if you notice them in your person with Parkinson's, tell your doctor. It's critical, because if they are related to the medicines can be changed and those symptoms can go away.
Okay. Along those lines, what if a Parkinson's care partner is watching their person with Parkinson's have a hallucination, and whether I guess in this instance, they don't have insight. The person with Parkinson's is very upset. They don't know that this is just like this hallucination. They actually think it's happening. What can their care partner do?
Well, the first thing is not to try to agitate the person with Parkinson's and get them react. You got to think safety first. So if someone is actively hallucinating, what you want to do is ask them about it and determine whether they are, if they know that it's real or not. If they understand that it's not real, then that's not an emergent situation. You don't have to worry too much about that. And that's something that you can talk through. You might ask them about it. What do you see? How does that make you feel? Is it something scary to you? Why don't we move along and try and distract them so that they don't see it? If they don't have insight, that is, if they don't realize that is hallucination and they really think it's there, they see an animal in front of them and it's scary and you're afraid that they're going to react, the first thing you have to do is consider their safety. You don't want them falling. You don't want them to react in a violent way. You don't want them to go out. We had somebody shoot up their house because they thought an animal was in the house and went and got the gun out of the closet and started shooting. Obviously those are things you want to avoid. and you got to assess for safety. Sometimes you can talk people out, but a very good strategy is to distract them. If you can get them to attend to something different, often the hallucination will go away or fade, or they become less concerned about it. But again, if it's a dangerous situation, you need to call 911 or get somebody to help you so that there's not a problem physically.
Okay. Thank you. Patina, a couple of people have asked about like, is caffeine-free diet pop? I love pop. I haven't heard the word pop in a while. Is that considered, water? Is that going to help in the, digestive benefit? They said tea, they heard that's a diuretic. Is that really going to help? So can you make a little distinction there about, is it because of the caffeine that's bad or what?
Yeah, so the caffeine-free pop, it would be not dehydrating, so it would count, you can count that toward your fluid intake. However, it does still have the carbonic acid, anything that's carbonated, so it can sometimes cause, excess amounts can cause irritation, in your esophagus and things, especially if you have reflux. That would be something you would want to stay away from, definitely, but it's not going to be dehydrating. So if you had tea that's caffeinated, then that would be more dehydrating. Although everyone has kind of a different level of tolerance with that too. So with nutrition, a lot of things are very individualized, I think. So, but I would try to limit the total caffeinated beverages to about that 16 ounces a day combined, everything. So I wouldn't say, let's try to get the majority of our fluids in through decaf, sodas or pop, but still we want the majority to come from water as much as possible.
Great, thank you. Meghan, so a lot of people say, they hear about a physical therapist and they, some of their friends go to them, but they think, I'm not bad enough to have that yet. I don't need a physical therapist. What are the benefits of meeting with a physical therapist right away, early on in your diagnosis? And what can somebody expect when they first go? I think part of the concern is, well, I don't want to go now and then I have to go every week. I'm not like that bad. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We've really tried at, our practice to educate over the years, neurologists and movement disorder specialists, that we want to try to see people earlier, because what historically has happened is we don't start to see people with Parkinson's until they've had a fall or have a significant issue. That, not to say we can't help them then, but the earlier that you come in for PT, the more education we can provide. And it definitely doesn't mean, oh, you have to come 3 times a week for 3 months and it's this huge ordeal. It may be at first just providing education that, we've shared today, and about, maybe what are you doing at home? What kind of exercises are you doing and what's best for you? And just a lot of education. It might be just a few sessions initially, and then developing that relationship. What we want to do is have that relationship so that I tell my clients every year, I want to see you for a little check-in to see if you're, I don't want clients to be discharged from PT and then they regress, because a lot of us, just gets hard to do stuff at home sometimes. And if you're not in a regular routine, they come the next year and they're kind of back where they started before. But if we develop that relationship, anytime they notice a change in their symptoms or difficulty with an activity or transfers or something, they know they can call and they can come back in. And so that we have that, because we know this is a lifelong issue that they're dealing with. So I really structure that frequency based on the client's needs. And we just have a really open dialogue about, what they're struggling with or what information they want at the time. And so it can be a really brief thing, or it could be if someone's really having a lot of trouble, I might see them for a few months to really work on safety with transfers and with walking and with balance and all of that. So really structuring a program that's client specific, I think, is important.
Great, thank you. Mark, a couple of people have asked about this. Can you explain briefly again the difference between Alzheimer's dementia and Parkinson's disease dementia? And then I have a follow-up question to that, but let's start with that.
Okay. So both are classified as neurodegenerative diseases, meaning neurons in the brain and cells in the brain die for as currently an unknown reason. We don't know why these cells are dying off. And the cells in the brain that die off are important because in Parkinson's disease, they produce neurochemicals, dopamine being an important one, but also serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and others. And in Alzheimer's disease, the cells that die off are often related to acetylcholine. So there's a shared neurotransmitter that's being affected in both diseases. But critically, the cells in the different areas of the brain are dying off in the two diseases. So in Alzheimer's disease, the cells are in the limbic system of the brain, and the limbic system is critical for memory function. So the first and worst symptom of Alzheimer's disease is usually memory disorder. And it's a very prototypical kind of memory disorder, which is a loss of information and a failure to learn new information over time. That's Alzheimer's disease. In Parkinson's disease, a completely different area of the brain is dying off, and those cells produce another chemical, that's dopamine and others, which I've talked about. And those neurotransmitters support the frontal lobes of the brain, not necessarily the limbic system of the brain. So because the two diseases affect different parts of the brain, there's different symptoms. And in Alzheimer's disease, the symptom is primarily memory trouble, but you can also get word finding troubles. You can get visual symptoms as well. It's not limited to just the limbic system. In Parkinson's disease, it's primarily the dopaminergic system in the basal ganglia, which project to the frontal lobes of the brain. So the symptoms you get are referable to the frontal lobes of the brain. But there is some overlap so that you can get some commonalities. But the primary difference is that the memory disorder of Alzheimer's disease is much more prominent, and it's of a different kind. It's where you actually lose information over time. In Parkinson's disease, that's not the typical root of the memory loss. It's usually an encoding problem or a retrieval problem. But in about a quarter of patients with Parkinson's disease, they do develop a dementia in which more significant cognitive problems happen. And notably, the cognitive issues have to affect your ability to care for yourself or live independently. That's the definition of a dementia, as opposed to just subtle cognitive problems that you may experience with Parkinson's disease.
Okay, wow, I never heard that final distinction. That was like, interesting. So the question then, the follow-up question is, does being diagnosed with early onset give you a greater or lesser likelihood of developing dementia?
So the greatest risk factor for dementia is age. So the older you are, the more likely you are to get cognitive symptoms that affect your ability to care for yourself. So the older you are, the more likely you are to get dementia. So if you have an early onset Parkinson's disease, and you're diagnosed in your 40s or perhaps 50s, the cognitive changes tend to be more subtle because you're younger and in the early onset disease. When you're 70 and you're diagnosed with Parkinson's, your risk of having dementia is higher because you're simply older. And it's probably a different flavor of Parkinson's disease when you're older, which can come with more cognitive symptoms. In general, we think that younger onset Parkinson's disease has a more subtle cognitive profile.
Okay, great. I'm going to do a couple like rapid fire for the shorter questions. We're almost out of time. Patina, what about taking benefiber or psyllium fiber?
Yeah, so that would be a soluble fiber. Definitely, that's the type of fiber that more often people will tolerate very well. So certainly that could be something to add to your diet if you're having trouble meeting the dietary fiber recommendations through, just your typical foods. So that certainly can be a decent option, and that's soluble in liquid, so you can just add it to a liquid. It's easy to take. You can't really tell that it's there. So yeah.
Is that something that people need to worry about in terms of like, can they take it for the rest of their life every day? Do they like create a tolerance to it? Is there any long-term?
I don't know of any contraindications to that at all. So.
And then another one for you, Patina. What about companies such as Viome that analyze stool to make dietary recommendations?
Well, there's a lot of research being done with the gut, brain, the microbiome, and all of that. And so I don't know what they do with that particular company, but certainly that's why we talk about the prebiotics, so that plant fiber that helps feed the healthy microorganisms in the gut being important. So I don't know what analysis is being done, particularly specifically with that stool, but I think there's a lot being done in that area currently.
Thanks. Megan, So 3 questions. What exercise help with fine motor skills?
So there's, as far as like a general exercise, I think that there's fine motor activities that are part of the power program, that are part of the rock steady program. I think Tai Chi can incorporate some of that, but also if you're not in like a group exercise program, doing things such as, like I mentioned, threading a washer on a string, or working on picking up small objects out of a bowl of rice, or you know, different activities. You might notice practicing buttoning buttons is part of something that, you know, you probably do on a daily basis. So you can do those kind of activities at home too, if you're not doing that specifically in a group class.
Great. Yes, and someone said knitting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stationary bike or outdoor bike? Is there any preference there?
Well, I think safety is number one. So with an outdoor bike, you know, a lot of people have difficulty just getting on and off of the bike safely. So that's the first thing. If that's not something that you're really comfortable with, a stationary bike would be better. But if you're able to be outside safely, that's great. I think one of the challenges, if you're really trying to target that like higher intensity and work at a higher intensity level, sometimes that's difficult if you're riding outside. But I think that both have benefit and both are excellent. But mostly it's just making sure that you're safe if you're cycling outdoors.
Right. And then last one, does gardening count as intense exercise?
Does what, gardening?
Gardening.
Oh, I think it definitely can be. I think it depends on what you're doing, but gardening is for sure, things like that for sure count as exercise. That gets your heart rate up. That works on, you know, strength and agility. Just getting down to the ground and getting back up is so important. Being able to do a transfer like that is so crucial for your function. And I think maintaining that is important, especially if you do have a fall, to be able to get back up. And I know from my experience, it can feel very intense. So I think that's a great activity to do.
Great. Okay, so Mark, you talked about this a little bit, but somebody asked about it's frustrating for a care partner when their person with Parkinson's can't remember, doesn't have the memories, and they're trying to get them out of that person. And I think you gave a couple of examples, and I just want to make sure that we reviewed them correctly. One of them is like, look at pictures, help them remember it. If they're in a moment, say, hey, take a picture of this in your head, really, like, remember this, like, this is going to be something we want to remember. And then practice memory. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Those are 3 very critical steps. I think one thing to emphasize just here at the end is that issue of mindfulness and being present in the moment is really very critical, because if you're not present in the moment and you're thinking about what you have to do next, or you're thinking about what happened prior, you're not in the moment and you're not taking advantage of all the rich information that's being presented to you at that particular moment to help you build this very rich representation of the thing you want to remember, whether it be the words that your doctor just said to you as you leave the office, or where your car is parked, or anything like that. You've really got to be in the moment and paying attention is what I mean by that.
Great.
That's critical.
Yeah, thank you.